I want to welcome Peter Weston, but I'm wondering if you can flesh out what does your frontline, that's the context that we're talking in, what does your work look like?
So I've been involved with international aid and development, in community development overseas for well over 20 years. In the last, 4.5 years, instead of working for an organisation, my wife Jenny and I started our own little business, our own little consultancy agency. So what our work consists of, Tim, is that we specialise in project evaluation. And so what that means is that if an aid organisation, which might be a not-for-profit or a charitable organisation like World Vision or Child Fund and so on, if they have a project or a program that they're running overseas that needs to be evaluated, or if they're a UN agency or even a government-funded project, then we're kind of a specialised operation that they can call on to actually go and spend time in the communities they've been working with, or other forms of research, especially during COVID where I can't travel, to help them to learn what's been working well in their projects and programs and what has not been working well and what might they be able to do differently in order to improve the development work to help poorer communities.
Realise that that's very broad, but what would be some of the justice issues that you see within that kind of environment, I suppose?
Yeah, there's a couple of points that come to mind on that topic. What are the justice intersections in the work that I do and that we do? One of them, I guess, is pretty obvious, and that is that the kind of projects that I get the privilege to work alongside tend to work with some of the most marginalised people in the world, some of the most vulnerable communities in the world, whether that's on a very remote, isolated island in a remote Pacific country in the Pacific Ocean, whether it's inland, remote, rural village in Africa or a war-torn community in Iraq, so on and so forth. So one is simply that we are working with people who the world has left behind in some respects, who don't have a fair access to opportunity and to the ability to gain reward or appropriate reward for their efforts and their livelihoods and so on. So that's one. The second is, I guess, the challenge within international development. There's often the temptation to rely on the experts, and so if looking at a particular challenge in a particular set of communities, to think, okay, let's take, for example, water and sanitation and hygiene, a real massive problem. So it can be very easy to say, okay, what do the experts say we should do here, and then go and do it to the community. Whereas, for me, justice is about how does that organisation collaborate with those community members to actually understand what they're willing and what they're keen to do, what their aspirations are, what they see as the solutions, and then being able to converge the benefit of the wisdom and the knowledge that external experts have, but actually place that in the context of what the local communities who will inherit that legacy, what their aspirations are, and how do they move forward, and how does their voice actually become the prominent voice rather than yet again the marginalised voice.
Today's topic is Mouthpiece for Truth and Justice, and you have already touched on how you are a mouthpiece of truth and justice in your frontline, in your space. Is there any stories or is there anything else that you can tell us about how you live out that? How do you best see being an agent of truth and justice in those contacts and clients and that space that you work in?
Yeah, I guess there's kind of two ways for that. One is, just in the nature of the work that I do. The great thing is that I do get to have contact with these communities that we're talking about. And so one aspect is to be able to, convert the everyday stories of hundreds or thousands of people that I come in contact with, be able to convert those stories into kind of credible, usable kind of data that then those aid organisations can use to advocate for those communities, both in terms of being able to quantify and demonstrate the need to the wider world, not just with nice stories, but to actually make it credible and like I said, credible and quantifiable. And also for them to be able to identify, through listening to people, what those opportunities are for them to improve. A second aspect is just, in some respects, being, following Jesus in really being incarnate, very much being present. And what I mean by that is, in fact, let me give you an anecdote. You did mention about stories. One that just comes immediately to mind. Going back a number of years, the way that I tend to work is that I really like to sit with people, not just come in as the expert with the clipboard and often these days it's data collection on a mobile phone and things like that, but not just to come and be the expert and to, extract from people, but to actually take longer, sit with people, have a cup of tea with people, sit on the log, whatever it is, and as much as one can as an outsider to work on becoming a peer in the sense of creating a sense of a level sort of discussion field, yes. Create a sense of conversationalism with the people that I'm working with, these communities, often who have never received even a primary school education, whose experiences are semi-subsistence, half of their livelihood is foraging from the wild and half might be sort of, localised, vegetable or grain production or goats or whatever the case might be. And so, creating a sense of equality. And the anecdote I was going to say is that in one instance in Ethiopia, for example, I was working with a number of African colleagues or Ethiopian colleagues and meeting with people in their own homes, in their own literally grass huts, to have a conversation with them, and we'd have very long conversations. And afterwards, one of my African colleagues, who was extremely well educated, he was actually he had a doctor's degree, a medical doctor's degree, and was working in international health and whatnot. And as an Ethiopian working in Ethiopia, he was saying to me as the outsider, "Man, that was amazing, Peter. I've never seen anyone just relate to people like that. You really took the time to listen." And so it was being able to, demonstrate that even though at times it's easy for us to be set apart, or allow ourselves to be set apart, or even set ourselves apart because we are higher educated or because we come from a richer country or whatever the case might be. But, all people are made in God's image. So, if I can demonstrate to those communities, the organisations we're working with, that I'm working with, and to other colleagues I'm working with, that, we're in this together. It's not us helping them, it's we're in it together as God's people.
That's right.
That's another way that I can advocate for justice in kind of elevating others, perhaps by demonstrating by practice how to humble ourselves.
Yep. That's awesome. That's fantastic.